Hey there. Happy Thursday. Oh my goodness. I'm just recognizing the significance that we are having an anniversary on a Thursday. Thursdays are the days. This is when the fun things happen. If you're just jumping in, go ahead and jump into the comment section so I know you're here. Say hey. Let me know too where you're coming to us from. Daniele. Oh my goodness. It's been so much fun. First of all, it was so fun coming back to Instagram yesterday after having a 5 month hiatus from that platform. And then, just coming back on and seeing all of the names and faces, familiar people who I know. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're all here. So thank you to Instagram for not penalizing me too harshly for such a significant absence. Hey, Ivy, what's shaking, bacon? Stuart's here. Hey, oh, Steve, thank you. 5 years, holy moly. I was joking with folks in our community how hilarious that it is that this is the longest job I've ever held in my entire life. My most previous job in sales was for 4 years. So we have now officially superseded that. I guess I have found what I'm supposed to be when I grow up. It only took me 40 years, but here we are. Rachel, hey, good to see you. Oh, very good. Out in the mud visual. I'm so glad that you found us as well. It's so much fun, just seeing again, sitting here in retrospect, thinking back to 5 years ago when, 0 followers on the channel, 0 followers on Instagram, and just putting this thing out into the world to help people who I knew were specifically struggling with operating a camera in manual mode. So I always go back to, people go, do you get tired of teaching manual mode on the camera? And I go, no, I do not. I love it because we all know like how much power there is that suddenly when you unlock those skills, like it never gets old for me. So yeah. Oh, hey Reese. Oh my gosh, happy birthday to Reese. I'm so happy for you. Glad you're celebrating with us. I'm like, oh my gosh, why didn't I have a cake today? I should have had a cake. Well, there's a cake on Instagram. So pulling out all the pinks there on Instagram today. But thank you for being. Oh, real quick, we got to do a little shout out here for Yusef. Yusef is the man behind the edits on the YouTube channel. If you have appreciated the fun little moments and the beautiful editing that has been done to our YouTube videos, that is all this guy right here, making it magic and adding all sorts of fun little quips and things like that. So a big shout out to Yusuf for helping make the YouTube videos more exciting and to make my job easier so we can continue to create great content for you. So awesome. Oh, it's so good to see everybody. So one of the things, let's see if I can figure out how to. Here we go. There we are. Oh, getting all the features. It's been almost a year since I have been live on YouTube. I looked at it, it was September 29th of last year. So it's been a hot minute. So we're just getting reoriented here. So many friendly faces here in the feed though. And that is definitely my favorite thing is just, knowing that it's not just me out here. It's all of you and all the individuals and just seeing how you're winning at your businesses and creating beautiful food photos. So one of the things that we put out to our course communities on Monday, we ran a poll asking what were the most challenging foods to photograph and style. And we had it was neck and neck between sandwiches and soups. Soups did ultimately win out. And then we were like, well, let's see what happens, when we pose this same question over on Instagram, since we just re-entered that platform yesterday. And lo and behold, soups and sandwiches were the neck and neck, but soups inched it out at 40% of the votes. So what we're going to do here today is I'm going to walk you through. I've got a little slideshow for you, sharing some of my favorite tips on styling soups and photographing soups. And hopefully this will give you some ideas. because apparently, and I agree with this, like soups are a challenging subject. There are some unique elements to it. So I'm going to share some great little tips that I don't think I have shared these ones before on YouTube. So hopefully these are some new, fresh ideas for you. And two, if you want to kind of go more in depth, I know lots of you here already have my book. There is a chapter inside of my book, Picture Perfect Food, dedicated to soups. But this is also telling me that we absolutely need to put in the content lineup. We need to put soups into the lineup because obviously this is a challenge. So we can dig deeper into this subject. But awesome. So who's excited? Who's excited for soups? We ready? We ready to get the soups going? By show of comments here, share with me the last soup that you photographed, if you can remember. I remember the last soup that I photographed. I actually have a picture of it in here. We photographed I think ramen it's easy in some ways and challenging in other ways. So we're gonna get into it. So let's go ahead and share my screen here. So very first tip for styling soups. This is a great hack. So this is an image captured for, Monica just did a tomato soup. Very nice. A vegan beef barley soup. Nice. Okay, we've got some good soups on the. Oh, absolutely, chili counts. Chili is definitely soup in my book. I guess the question is, yeah, where does soup end and where does where does other stuff begin? It's just like our tacos a sandwich. That's always a great debate. So let's jump into the soup hacks, though. So this photograph, actually from a cookbook I photographed a number of years ago, brought to mind the idea of when you are like you're plating soups in terms of food styling a soup. If you are working with a cream-based soup, which let's see, were there any recent cream-based soups? I'm not seeing a ton, but a mushroom soup, for example, potato soup, for example, broccoli cheese soup, is that you notice if you serve that hot and then it sits for a couple minutes, it develops like a little skin on the top of it, that little film. Have y'all ever interacted with that? Have you seen that happen before? So this is why butternut potentially too, depending again on what's the ingredients in that. But that's why when it comes to hot soups, and two, you're going to get a lot of steam. Now, maybe steam is what you want to capture, but if you're doing especially a top down and you want to avoid that skin, go ahead and just plate that soup cold so that you're not having to deal with that skin and fight that and, peel it off and all that. So cream-based soups, highly recommended to work with those cold as opposed to hot. So let's see, next tip here. Let's go ahead and get you the next screen in the lineup. All right, so this is an Italian wedding soup that we photographed for a client last year. And so this was plated by one of the food stylists who I work with frequently, who does a beautiful job specifically with soups. Maybe I should have him do a little guest appearance here. We'll see if we can get him to be on camera. But as far as when we have all these various different components, all these different ingredients in a soup, one of the things that can really help kind of set things up, because you're like, how do I know how to distribute everything in here, is that you're looking to create a distribution of the different items that is balanced, right? We think back to the idea, if you've ever watched the composition series that I shared a number of years ago, if you haven't, definitely go and watch that. It is a playlist on the channel, but how to create the idea of like the balance of visual weight, that you've kind of got this equal balance. And so, for example, we look at this bowl of soup here, and we've got the meatballs, right? And so the meatballs are kind of like the anchor of the situation. But then you can also see like the little pasta, right? Those little dots, those are the pasta. I forget exactly what kind of pasta that is. I'm sure there's some Italians in here who can shout it out and tell me what kind of pasta that is. But you can see those are also kind of grouped in little patches, if you will. And the same with the kale and with the other ingredients, that you've sort of created these like individual components that are then evenly distributed, that there is a sense of balance there, but they're not quite perfect. So for example, we can see too that idea of how odd numbers are visually appealing to us. So for example, you see there are 5 meatballs and there are 3 wedges of cheese, right? And that there are, let's see, There's actually about 4 pockets of the little pastas there, but you can kind of see how each of those is their own individual thing so that you can readily identify what it is. Because one of the places where we can go wrong in styling a soup that sometimes it just feels like too overworked, if you've ever experienced that, is when it's like too evenly distributed. And also when we have these different components that we can't readily identify what they are. So by creating these little, again, for lack of a better term, little pockets of individual ingredients that they're kind of clumped together so that we can readily identify them, because that is really something that I work so hard on in food photography, is really asking myself a question when we photograph something. If somebody looks at this, do they know within a split second what it is? Or maybe they don't know exactly what dish it is, but they can readily identify what is it they're looking at. So, I can look at a dish that is not a food that I've eaten before, but I know that, this is a soup. I know that these are individual components. So by helping to kind of group them together in little patches helps us to more readily identify what it is that we're looking for. So, but yeah, I love the rule of odds playing in here. You can also see the way that Brendan did this was kind of in a circular fashion that also helps to keep our eye inside the bowl. So, it's not necessarily you look at this immediately and go, oh, it's like a wreath, but he kind of did. And that's the other thing too, in terms of plating this, all of these component parts were plated first. So, putting down a bed of the pasta, putting down the kale, and then building up the cheese on top and putting the meatballs on top, and then adding the liquid so that then we could get the liquid to just the right height. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the lighting in this one a little in another moment. So yes, I agree, Takara. I really hope that at some point we can get him. Not everybody is a huge fan like yours truly of being on camera. So we'll see if we can get him to join us. So yeah, so that was the Italian wedding soup. And the first one, I think, let's see, there was a question as to what the first soup was, and that was a butternut squash soup. So here we go. Super 3, tip number 3. We're doing 5 for 5 years, right? Reminds me of Arby's, for anybody here in the US familiar with was it the Arby's 5 for 5? This is our 5 for 5 today. So now we have up next, if you've got my book, Picture Perfect Food, you'll recognize this one. This is actually from the soups chapter. So one of my favorite tips for soups in terms of when we're plating them. So this is another situation where a lot of those component parts were put together before, like all of the different pieces that are in there, that those were kind of added, and then the liquid is added on top. And a lot of times what I will do, and different food stylists have different levels of comfort with where they plate and how that ends up in the scene. I love a certain amount of mess in the food photography, so I don't mind if things are plated on set, whereas there's definitely other photographers and stylists who are like, never played anything on set. So it just kind of all, again, a matter of your comfort level. But especially when we're dealing with soups that have like a rich color, like a red or even a butternut squash soup, or soups, any soups in general, but that if you walk around with it and starts to slosh, and then you get that little ring around the soup bowl. So in order to avoid that, again, kind of put all the pieces into it and then add your liquid on set, but then use a funnel to add that, just to, again, give yourself a little bit of insurance policy to make sure that you're not splashing all over your scene. But then it's going to really help because you're not moving the soups, like you're not trying to walk it from the kitchen to the setup. And so then you're not ending up with all of those rings that then you have to go around. If you've ever done that before, you're like, I got to take my paper towel and clean up the rim of it. Instead, just put everything together on set. That's going to make your life a lot easier. I'd love to know in the comment section, has anybody done that one before? Is that a hack you've already known and used? I would love to know. I'm sure we've got some pros here running around in the comment section. Awesome. So then number 4. Hey, Adriana, thank you so much. Thanks for the congrats. So now moving on to number 4, and this is one we just photographed last week for a client, is that we want to keep in mind, and this is applicable to all of the images we've reviewed and all the soups in general, is that it's really helpful to pay attention to the height of the liquid. And so thinking through, how much bowl do we want to see? Are we able to see the liquid? Now, this is sort of, I think a lot of times soups, we very naturally tend toward the overhead perspective, which you definitely saw in the previous photos. But here coming in at this angle, I do sort of love this angle. It just really brings us into the food. But you want to make sure that your liquid is high enough in order to, still decipher that liquid. But I also like a certain amount of the bowl visible. Now, if you're ever working with a client and you are doing a soup, it is important to ask them to know, like, how high do we want this? Do we want this filling, full up to the brim? Do we want sort of, kind of this inset more? So that is a great question. And as you can see too, if we go back to some of these other ones, just minding, again, that distance so that it really helps to separate the soup from the bowl. Again, going back to the idea of composition, these are effectively little circles that we're drawing all around our beautiful soup to help narrow the eyes in, zoom in, like, X marks the spot, that it's putting like a target right around it, helping to frame it. We can even look at the other previous examples again, sort of that depth. I like a certain amount of lip, but it is interesting if you start to study soup photos, which I think is also another really important practice to get yourself some ideas of the way that you want to do things. You'll definitely notice, kind of those different levels, and you will have some personal preferences, right? And I think that's the thing we always have to keep in mind with food photography is there is no one right way to do all the things, that there is only the way that you want to do it and the way that works for you, and also, certainly your clients as well. But you will naturally gravitate toward a particular level and something that looks good for you. But here, you can see the soup, but also we really wanted to showcase the chicken and the ingredients because that was an important part of what we were presenting for this particular brief. Let's see. Oh, good question from Sarah. How do you figure out if you want to shoot your food you make or not? And if you want to, how do you go about it? It's hard time planning the food shoot. So, as far as like, just to make sure I understand the question, how do you figure out if you want to shoot your food that you want make or not? So a lot of times, for me personally, a lot of the food that I'm photographing is for the purposes of clients. So that does make it sort of easier that I'm not having to come up with the ideas of what we're photographing. Certainly too, for the YouTube channel, usually I have a very specific, like it's either I'm shooting for clients or I'm shooting for, content for education purposes. And so usually that is informed by kind of those guardrails. And that's how I get inspired to do what it is that I photograph. But certainly what I will say too is that as far as the food side of things, it definitely is easier when you can start to collaborate with other people, unless you really, really love cooking. I like cooking enough. I'm dangerous enough. I certainly have skills. But I will say it has opened up a whole other level of creativity for me as I've started to collaborate with chefs and other people doing the cooking. And now I've gotten really spoiled and used to it. So, depending on where you're at in your trajectory of your career, certainly though, for a good number of years, I was doing all the things. And you definitely just can't get as much done in the course of a day when it's only you doing all the shopping and the cooking and the cleaning and the setting up of the scene. So I absolutely understand all of that as well. So just I think being realistic too with what it is that you can accomplish in a day versus what you can do with more people. And so that's why, as you start to look at two bigger productions, why there's so many people is because they can just get through that many more dishes, that much more work in the course of a day when there's more hands, right? Many hands make light work. So I love it. So let's go ahead and pay attention to the level of the soup so that we know it's soup as well, right? And then very last in our lineup here, coming back to the Italian wedding soup here. Something that is very important to me, and I can go back through to the previous images, something that I love about soup. This is the thing that I'm just like totally sends me. And some of y'all already know this term and you use it. And I know that first time I learned this terminology, I felt like so dangerous. I'm a fancy photographer. I know the fancy photographer terms, right? So taking advantage with soup of the use of specular highlights. We all love our specular highlights, right? Show me some specular highlights love in the comments section. We all love it, right? So if you're not familiar with what specular highlights are, as we are looking at this soup or anything that has liquid or has a surface that is apt to shine, it's the shinies, it's the specular highlights. It's these little extra sparkly moments where the light is hitting the subject, bouncing back up into the camera and reading as technically glare, but because it's so small, it reads as these little sparkles. And so as we start to look at, for example, like just this little moment here on the kale, I mean, this little moment right here on the kale, I am such a nerd for this, right? Like I just see that and I go, oh, I love it, right? And then too, just these little moments around the meatball where we're able to capture and catch that little specular highlight, that just totally sends me. And I think that that really helps the food to look, anytime we have an opportunity for specular highlights to add that little bit of glisten. For example, I know for sure, this has been a while ago since we photographed this, but I can guarantee that right before we took the photo, we made sure to just take a little bit of that liquid and pour it over the top of the meatball so we would capture just a little bit more of that light and of that sparkle. And I'm also too, as we're setting up a scene and staging something, like a soup like this, I may rotate it a couple times, or because I'm working with artificial light, I will move the light, just slightly up or down or right or left in order to really maximize the way that the light hits, because it is pretty remarkable. The next time you're doing photography, the next time you're photographing something, particularly something top down, because top down photos can tend to look a little flatter. But next time you're doing a shoot, just ever so slightly rotate the bowl, rotate whatever it is that you're photographing, as long as there's some sort of shiny surface there, just rotate it ever so slightly and take another shot, and you will see how the positioning and the presence of specular highlights will change, right? Like if this little piece of kale was pushed down a little bit more, we wouldn't capture that little glimmer moment, right? And if the light was maybe lower or in another position, we wouldn't capture that same little glimmer. So always remembering the idea that we want to position the camera in such a way that we can capture those glimmers. And sometimes if you're just not familiar with that and you haven't had a lot of practice with that, just again, put yourself in that little moment. Next time you're photographing a soup, just kind of move around it and see how the specular highlights change. You can even do this too if you're like, I don't want to plate of soup, Joni. Soups are stressing me out. You can even do this with like just a sliced tomato. Take a tomato, slice it in half so that you've got all those nice little internal segments that are nice and juicy, and then just play around with how do you maximize and minimize those specular highlights. And the more practice you get with that, the more second nature it will be, that you're not even necessarily like, I'm not actively thinking in a photo shoot, how do I maximize the specular highlights? It's just something that I internally desire and do now because it has become second nature. So that is the goal. That's the practice to how to see those little moments and those little details. Absolutely. I completely agree that the specular light, it gives it more depth, right? Because we also think about the fact that in any photograph, when it comes to lighting, that we want a good variety of tones. We want tonal contrast, right? So for example, in this image, we have those bright little popping highlights that are like right up at the top of the spectrum, right? Those are, if we were going to gauge that, if you're familiar with in terms of the number 255, those are 255, right? Like they're at the top of the scale. But at the same time, we look further into the depths of this, like at the bottom of that meatball, we have some nice shadows, right? And so when we look at a two-dimensional flat image, right? This is being presented on a flat screen, but it feels three-dimensional because we have those brights, we have those darks, and our eyes tell us that is a three-dimensional subject. So that is definitely something that, over the 5 years that I've been teaching food photography on YouTube and working with folks who are in our courses, working through learning lighting, that we see that a lot of times what can happen is you start adding too many bounce cards to the scene, or you're trying to fill in the shadows too much, and you really lose that contrast. You really lose that sense of depth because you're overlighting the scene. You've got too much light can be a problem. So those specular highlights, they're like that top end of the spectrum that just make everything pop. So Awesome, awesome. Ooh, yes, Leanne, melted chocolate. Super fun to play with too for specular highlights. So, for those who've noticed that I've been up on TikTok for the last month, gave myself a little 30-day TikTok challenge, shared a little tip on getting that chocolate to sparkle is bust out your heat gun. Like if you've got some chocolate chip cookies and you want to add that sparkle back to them, just like when they come out fresh out of the oven and the chocolate is all shiny and melty and ooey gooey, and we go, oh, that looks so good, right? If your cookies have been sitting out a while or lost some of that sparkle, just bust out your heat gun, right? One of our favorite food styling tools, and just blow a little hot air over the tops of those, and the sparkle and shine will come right back, so you can get those specular highlights there as well. Awesome. All right. This is a great, so real quick, a great question as far as natural light. I still know how to. Every so often, I will, just to make sure I haven't lost it. I haven't lost it. What I will say is actually artificial light for my own personal journey. I'm not sure anybody else who relates to this journey, who's jumped into the world of artificial lighting, is that my skills in natural light actually were strengthened. Like I got better at working with natural light after I transitioned to artificial light, because I felt like I was able to control and manipulate and understand more about lighting in general, and that reverse engineering that back to natural light gave me that control. But I did have, just a number of months ago, this was maybe April or May, there was a new video on the channel with a behind the scenes of a natural light photo shoot. So yeah, if you are looking to, if you're a natural light shooter and you want some tips, that's a great video to go check out. So let's see. So those are my top 5 favorite tips as it relates to, well, not my favorite. I mean, there's lots of tips as it relates to soup, but these are ones that I felt like hadn't necessarily been shared before, and they can absolutely help you out next time you are plating soup. If you're just joining us and you're like, oh no, I missed the tips, no worries. We will post this replay afterwards, so you can go get those tips. Get those tips there. I am super curious to know, do we have any favorite tips or any other tips for soups? Because again, soup is a struggle. It's become abundantly clear that we need more soup styling content. But I would love to know other soup recommendations you have. Feel free to drop those down into the chat. And Joanna, great question here. Where do I find your courses? If you go to thebiteshot.com, there is a tab. Currently, we only have one course open. We are in the process. If you watched my YouTube or my Instagram reintroduction yesterday, we are working on all sorts of things behind the scenes over here, which includes kind of a bigger, larger complement of course offerings. But as of right now, we have Artificial Academy, which is my artificial lighting course. It has been there for 3 years. It has gone through many iterations. It is my baby. It is one of the things I'm most proud of, and we have a whole lot of fun in there talking lighting. So if you are at that point where you're like, okay, I've got this natural light thing, or like, yes, I've got my manual mode settings going, but now I want to introduce artificial light to the equation. Absolutely. We would love to have you come join us. I am there for personalized support. So as you have issues that you run into or questions, things that you need help with, myself as well as our team, and also just the amazing community that's there. There's quite a few folks here in the feed today who are some of the folks from our community. So thank you too for being there. But we'd love to have you join us. All right. Ooh, Ksenia coming in hot. Love this. Throw a small bowl or ramekin in the bottom to prop up heavy garnish to prevent it sinking. Totally. That's a great one. Definitely can create that ability to level up. I love that. Let's see what other tips we have here. Ooh, I like this one. Yes. Add the garnish to add color and depth. Absolutely, right? Like we think back to this image back here. If we come back into, let's pop back up here, right? You just imagine what this soup would look like if it didn't have, those little pops of green and those different colors, and even just like the little, whatever. I'm not entirely sure what those are, but those little speckles, those little details, that's also something that's fun to think about now that I'm thinking about when it comes to garnish, is having a visual variety in terms of the sizes of just like the components that you're adding into a soup, that it's not just like, I think that having a number of different sizes of things, right? Because like you have the overall bowl, but then we have like these smaller little bits and pieces, and then we have kind of these larger green pieces, and then kind of these, I'm not entirely sure what all these things were. It looks like maybe a ginger or a carrot or something like that, or parsnip maybe. But in terms of, we've got some visual variety in terms of the sizes and in terms of the colors. And again, oh, look back to threes, right? Talking about those component parts of your soup, thinking about that rule of odds and how our eyes are pulled to odds. I love it. Oh, all right. Simeon's great question. So I figure let's go ahead and just fly into Q&A. I've got about 30 minutes to hang out here, so happy to answer as many questions as I can. So as far as tips on a west-facing window in natural light. So this is so funny. The studio where I started the Bite Shop, which all of this, so this current studio, which we built and was finished last year, May of last year, is amazing. Dream come true. Can't believe that I get to hang out here. This is incredible. And the studio though that I started the YouTube channel on, which you'll definitely see lots of evidence of, which was definitely not as fabulous and fancy, was actually we built in the back patio of our house and air conditioned it. Very important thing to do when you live in Phoenix, Arizona. Nice space. Again, super grateful to have had that space, but it had west facing windows. And I remember when I very first started photographing in there, I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I've got these west facing windows. Now, it all depends on the quality of the light that you're looking for. So, thinking about just the different times of day. So I remember in that space when I was shooting with natural light, I would prioritize, if I wanted soft light, that I would do that up until, like, I could do that in the mornings up until about, say, like 2-3 o'clock. But then, as once the light starts to hit the other side of the building and it starts to come through, then you get the direct light. But you know what? The direct light is beautiful too, right? Like, love some hard light. And that is an opportunity. Like, for example, the studio I have now, it's all north and south facing windows, which again, great for indirect soft light. But then I'm like, oh, I got to run around the house again if I want hard natural light, right? That's where you take advantage of an east or west facing window. But also the other opportunity is if it's later in the afternoon and you want to soften that light, then just getting a really big diffuser. So whether that is, you could just even use like a curtain, a sheer curtain that's got enough thickness in order to diffuse it. I also put into this the context that I, again, live in Phoenix, where this is a very sunny place and very intense sunshine. I had a friend visit from Northern California, and she comes here for the first time. She's like, it's just so bright here. I'm like, I know. It's so bright. And so if you are dealing with super bright light, then you don't live in a cloudy place and you need to tame that light, then yeah, either having something to diffuse that light. So that could be a curtain, or one of my favorite things is the 150 centimeter by 200 centimeter diffuser, that it's like one of those big pop-up ones. If you want to know how to fold it back up, just head to my TikTok account. Tagged right at the top of it is how to fold that bad boy up. But that is a really great tool as well to help diffuse the light. And those are fairly thick enough so that you will create soft light if that's what you're going for. And so it's just all a matter of, when we're talking about natural light or light in general, is there's no such thing as good light or bad light. It's a matter of what look you're trying to create. Because I do think, and I mean, we see plenty of examples of this in editorial food photography of beautiful, hard light going on, and that can really create an interesting and fun vibe. So yeah, hopefully that helps you out there. All right. There we go. Let's see. My house is very dark, so I'm always using artificial light when I decide to go out. It's always too bright. Yes, totally. So thinking about photographing things outside, and again, thinking about the idea that I just shared with the soups of how we want to create a situation, a scenario where we have enough depth, because there are bright and there are shadows. So when we're photographing outside, if you have sunlight coming in from all the directions, you're not allowing the opportunity for your subject to necessarily cast enough shadows, or enough shadows to be present in the scene for it to feel three-dimensional, right? So it's just like if you look at a cube, and I have a video coming out about this in a couple weeks, so stay tuned for this. But if you look at if you draw a cube, right, you draw a square, and it's just all the same color across, right? It's all the same tone of gray, it feels flat. Whereas if all of a sudden you draw that cube and you have a dark side to it and a light side to it and a middle tone side to it, suddenly it feels three-dimensional, right? And so when we're photographing outside, if you have sunlight coming in from all directions, you're not allowing the opportunity for that contrast and for the creation of shadows. And so in which case you may want to duck into a space where there is, an overhang, or where you can create that directional lighting, that you've got light coming in from one direction and it's casting shadows on the other side. So that may be something to play with. At the same time, just because I like shadows, you may be like, I love a flat looking photo, right? Because there's definitely food photography out there that has, different qualities and characteristics. So there's not necessarily a definition of what's the perfect lighting scenario. So it's just all a matter of what appeals to you. So I would say for you, if you do prefer, when you're shooting with your artificial light indoors and you're creating that three-dimensional sense, because you've got the bright tones and the dark tones, and you've got that even distribution of tones in your scene, and you're not finding that outside, go find a place where you've got an overhang or where you can take advantage of more directional lighting. All right. Let's see. Oh, yes, this is a good one. Get your little cotton ball action going on, microwave it, get that 45-degree shot with the steam going on. That's a good one, absolutely. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for all the kind words and comments and messages and emails and all the things this week. It's just literally made my week. I love it. Hey, thank you, Shauna. And thanks for being here. It's so much fun too to see some of like Shauna, for example, who has been here since the beginning, the originals, right? Like folks who were here with me 5 years ago when I it was a whole lifetime ago. I feel like that's the other thing that I just so appreciate about this adventure is that we've all learned together, right? Like where I am today versus where I was 5 years ago, just in terms of my photography knowledge, wildly different. And this is something I highly recommend is if you want to really turbocharge your food photography education, is go out and find some people to teach food photography too. Once you start teaching, that is the fastest way to learn, I will tell you. I love it. Oh, this is a great question. Here, let me get a little sip of water. So the West Shake and Bacon. It's so funny. I don't know. At a certain point, I just felt like I was doing it to do it as opposed to really authentically, you know what I mean? It just felt like it was a part of it, and then it just didn't feel like it was authentically genuine anymore, and it felt like a shtick, and I don't know. So West Shake and Bacon. I will still throw it out from time to time, but I'm like, yeah, it was good. That was the first season, right? And so now we're shifting in to another season, and that's okay, right? So hopefully the education is still top quality and still relates, and that you're still enjoying that. But yeah, it felt like it was time to retire it. But see, now that's our little secret, right? Like folks who reference the bacon, I know you've been around for a while, right? So if you've been around for a while and you know the bacon, go ahead and drop some bacon into the comments for me. I love it. Let's see. What other questions? Is that the shake and bacon girl? Yes. Somebody told me their kid referred to me as Joni Bacon. Oh, there's the bacon. Stay out of trouble. Indeed. I still do say that because that's a part of my daily lexicon. So oh, this is great. So a good basic photography course covering all the topics. So we are working on a little something behind the scenes over here. But in the meantime, my friend Lauren Karras over at Food Photography Academy, she's also here on YouTube, or Lauren Short. I still screw it up. But she, Food Photography Academy, if you go to foodphotographyacademy.com, she has a great basics course, gets you started, gets you all the introductory stuff. So that would be a recommendation. Or I do know plenty of people, perhaps some of you all are here, who have binged my channel, and that served as your foundation. That works too. Granted, though, it's not as necessarily as an organized fashion as a straightforward course. So I totally get that. I get that as well. But yeah, Lauren's a great resource to start with for sure. All right, let's see. Oh, look at all the bacon. Maybe I'll throw it in every so often. Maybe we'll do that. Maybe we'll do that. And yes, hit that. Oh, Rachel, always got my back there. I appreciate that. Yes, hit that. I mean, that's the other thing too, right? Smash that like button, like, subscribe. It's when my friends make fun of me for being a YouTuber. I'm like, come on now. I don't do all those hokey things, right? Oh, it's a great question. Okay. So any advice for artificial lighting for reels? I tried to find the Godox SL 150 watt. Oh no, yeah, the Godox SL 150, yes. But having trouble finding it in Canada. Any other recommendations? So pretty much what my recommendations are for continuous light sources. So the Godox suite of products being that. In the UK, I believe that's Pixa Pro is the equivalent. Like they're literally coming out of the same factory. They're just putting a different stamp on it. Same as in the strobes department, strobes and speed lights that Godox and Flashpoint, they're again literally coming out of the same factory. They're just putting a different sticker on it. But as far as other brands, again, Canada, not sure right off the top of my head, but certainly Aperture, not aperture like the photography setting, but Aputure with a U. Anybody who wants to drop that, who's familiar with that brand, feel free to drop it into the comments there for Christy. But it's that's another quality brand. But what you will look for is, for example, you've got, whether that be Amazon or another camera retailer in your country, is looking for in the photometrics. Like if you go down into the specs area, right? And you're like, oh, specs scary. The one that you need to look for is the CRI, the color rendering index. And that is going to determine that's going to tell you if that light's going to be quality in terms of the color. So anything that is a 95 or higher, so if it's 95, 96, 97, that means it's going to do a good job of casting a light that covers the spectrum, or at least the visible spectrum that an artificial light can capture, so that it feels accurate. Whereas like an artificial light, or a continuous light source that has a low CRI may end up with like magenta cast issues or, other color cast issues. So as long as your CRI is good. And then the other thing just to keep in mind is kind of the brightness factor. So, in terms of the watts don't necessarily determine how bright the light is. That is based on other metrics. But in terms of the power setting, like for example, Godox SL 60, they make a 60 watt, they make a 100 watt, they make a 150 watt, a 200 watt. The bigger the number, the brighter they get. Again, that's not necessarily a direct correlation. Photo nerds can dive deeper down that rabbit hole. But for all intents and purposes, the brighter the light you can get, the better if you are filming with a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, specifically because you are locked into certain camera settings for filming video. So for example, just to kind of take you down that rabbit hole real quick, anybody who is filming video on a DSLR or mirrorless camera, one of the things that's important in terms of your camera settings is your shutter speed should be double your frame rate. So for example, or at least the bottom number should be double your frame rate. Wait a minute. Hold up. No, now I'm thinking shutter speed. So as far as yes. Okay. Yes, it should be. Okay. So our frame rate. Now I'm like, oh no, Joni, you've gone down a road where you're going to be doing a whole tutorial and you need visuals. And I'm like, how do I explain this? Okay, here we go. There is an old channel there is an old video on the channel where you can go down this rabbit hole of camera settings. Just go the bite shot, camera settings for video, and you'll go down the frame rate rabbit hole and the shutter speed rabbit hole. And I will cover all the bases there. But just as an example, if we are filming a video at 24 frames per second, which is what I film my YouTube videos at, that we would want a shutter speed of 1/50th of a second. And we're pretty locked in at that. And then you don't want your aperture to be too narrow, because especially when we're filming food and close up food, the more narrow depth of field, the less it's in focus, and that can become a real challenge. And so we want a wide enough depth of field in terms of our aperture to fully see our subject. So something, I don't usually for food videos go lower than f 5.6, 6.3. That's about as low as I want to go. And so knowing we're kind of locked in at our aperture and our shutter speed, then the only other variable we have to work with is our ISO or the light that we're using. And so if you want to keep your ISO low to minimize grain, then a brighter light is going to be helpful. So knowing that we are sort of limited in terms of our camera settings for video, it's a long way to get around to that explanation. Knowing that we're limited in those settings, a brighter light is always going to be more helpful if you are creating videos on a DSLR or mirrorless camera. That being said, if you are creating your reels on a phone, then the phone's going to have a certain amount of compensation in there. So something like the 60 watt or a lower power setting continuous light source is going to be great. But really, that CRI is going to be super important to pay attention to. And then, yes, the brightness factor is then the other thing that's important to me. So hopefully, long explanation to get around to answering that question. But hopefully that helped you out. But yeah, if there are other, one of the things that I definitely do is for folks inside Artificial Academy, if you need help discovering, figuring out which light is which, I'm notorious for navigating product pages from other places that I'm not firsthand off or not familiar with off firsthand. So happy to help you navigate that inside the courses if you want to go deeper down that track with us. Good questions. All right, here we go. Da, 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 da. All right. Oh, it's a great question. Here we go. All right. Oh, here we go. Cassini has got a little answer for you. Looks like they do have the Godox at Henry's in Ottawa. There you go. All right. So the question, Capture One or Lightroom? I would love to know. Let's hit the comment section. Capture One or Lightroom? Let me know. Hit me. Me personally, well, there's personal, and then there's, that's we take anything that's a personal opinion with a grain of salt, right? So I personally it's been about 2.5 years ago, moved over to Capture One. There was a period of time where I was using Capture One for the tethering features and then editing in Lightroom, because my comfort level with editing was in Lightroom. But at a certain point, I was tired of dealing with two separate softwares when I knew that Capture One had all of the capabilities to do what Lightroom had. So I forced myself, just like anytime I'm learning a new skill and I'm having to transition into something that's hard, I just kind of like cut the cord and said, okay, we're done with Lightroom. I'm going to really focus on Capture One. And so that's been about now 2.5 years that I've been using Capture One exclusively. And now I feel so much more confident in that, right? The other day, somebody was needing help with something in Lightroom. So I fired up Lightroom and I'm like, where is everything? Okay, like I had to reorient, right? So it's just all a matter of what you get used to. Now, I will say I do really love some of the advanced features. Again, it really comes to me like the compelling reason for Capture One at the end of the day is I love tethering, and the advanced tethering features that Capture One offers definitely can't be matched by Lightroom, just in terms of the live view and all of the other components with that. And so I also do like just the way that the files are structured and the organization system in Capture One. It works much better for my brain, and it's I've really enjoyed that process. If you are just getting started with Capture One, or you want to like dip a toe in the water, we do have a previous video with a kind of introduction to Capture One that you can kind of take a look at it. And then there was a whole series 2 months ago of some of the tethering features inside of Capture One, some of the additional features in Capture One that I really liked. So, but I'm curious to see what does the comment section say? You're scared of Capture One. I get you. Totally. It is a learning curve, but we've done hard things before. Yes, no, and totally. It's one more thing to pay for, right? the money is a real component. So, well, good. I'm glad you're enjoying. Leanne says she's enjoying Capture One. That's awesome. Very cool. Yeah, definitely. Oh, here's another recommendation on lighting gear. So in terms of equipment, Westcott lights are definitely, yeah, they're definitely more affordable. They've got great quality modifiers. They've got some of their switch line of soft boxes are really easy to assemble, which I very much appreciate. So I love it. Oh, here's a good question. Extension tubes. Could extension tubes give a good output like a macro lens in food photography? Yes. And there is actually a video, I think 2 years ago, did all about extension tubes. So you can go check that out and go down that road. Extension tubes are a great low cost solution, right? Because a new macro lens or a used macro lens is definitely a significant investment, depending on what you're looking at. But like 100 millimeter for Canon, 100 millimeter macro for Canon is popular, and the 105 millimeter for Nikon is popular. But those are definitely, multiple hundreds of dollars. I haven't checked the pricing on those recently, but they're not cheap. And so extension tubes, though, you can get fairly inexpensive. The only thing is that there are a certain amount of limitations with extension tubes. They're great for super duper close up shots, right? Like, so you'll be able to get those macro tight detail shots with an extension tube, no problem. Where they do run into limitation is, so for example, I use my 105 millimeter Nikon macro lens often for, pretty much any photograph that I've taken in the last year from the side or the 3/4 angle on a food subject. For the most part, that's always going to be that 105. I just really like that compression. I like that sort of like zeroed in. The idea that when you're working with different focal lengths, if, for example, if you've ever photographed with a 16 millimeter, right, like that's a really wide angle. And so if you've ever noticed then too, it's like kind of bowed on the edges a little bit, right? Because it's kind of that wider perspective. It's the sort of concept of like a fisheye lens, right? Like it bends at the edges. Well, when we get into a longer focal length, a 105 millimeter and beyond, instead of bowing out, it's kind of almost zeroing in. We call that compression. It's compressing the background, really bringing the subject forward. And so with a really nice, with a longer focal length macro lens, I will still use that lens for those kinds of shots. So it's not always just up close. It is further away. But an extension tube, you will not be able to physically get further away from the subject. You do have a very specific area in which you can create that focus. But if you are looking for something to repurpose your current lenses and you really want those close-up tight shots, then absolutely extension tubes are a wonderful, wonderful solution there. I love it. Ooh, Affinity Photo. Okay, we've got a number of different softwares here. I love it. Let's see. All right, looking for some. Let's see. Ooh. So it's a good question here. How to make reels more cinematic? What editing tool would you suggest? What works best for videos? So I edit videos inside of Adobe Premiere. That's the software that I learned on. And so that's the software that I am the fastest with and feel most comfortable with. Just like we talk about Lightroom versus Capture One, right? It's all a matter of what you're used to. But one of the very popular softwares, and that definitely for video editing also has a lot of great features and is known specifically for its color grading features, is DaVinci Resolve. So a lot of folks are kind of like, we talk Lightroom versus Capture One. It's like Premiere versus Resolve. So if you haven't taken a look at that, I'd highly recommend it. The other bonus to DaVinci Resolve is that it's free. They do have a paid version, but honestly, most of what we would ever need is, food photographers is mostly covered in the free version. I've personally, I've used it. I would not say that I'm a super user of it by any stretch, but it definitely has everything I need in it for most video editing. And yeah, it has those advanced features in terms of color grading and really creating, interesting looks. But there's also a lot of, folks out there. And again, I am not a video expert, so I know enough to, create videos on YouTube and videos for clients, but I'm not, not necessarily in that expert arena. There's definitely lots of other educators in the YouTube space and online who definitely go further down that rabbit hole, but looking for example, if there's somebody who's offering unique LUT packages, those are kind of like presets, but for your video. And so that can also create sort of that additional look if you're looking for a very specific visual aspect there. But for me, when I'm creating interesting reels or interesting videos, I really just try to, kind of go back to the tools as a photographer of how to think about lighting and how to think about color and how to think about composition. I think those things can really leverage a lot without having to get too hyphy in your editing process. Now, certainly thinking through, I mean, so much of the beauty of a video, any filmmaker says, the movie's in the edit, right? That there's so much of the art in the edit process as well. And so, kind of it's all those things all combined, but absolutely, maybe going down the DaVinci Resolve path may be helpful for you. All right. Oh, here's a great Sarah talking about people making fun of your lights. Let me tell you a story about one time when anybody familiar with the low ego light? I'm sure there's some people. Feel free to share in the comments if you know the low ego light. I don't see them as much anymore, but they were like this little light box situation that it was like this plasticky thing and had, um, it had LED lights inside of it, but it was just kind of like this little light box. And I saw somebody using that, and I thought, oh, well, that's what that food blogger is using, so I should use that too. And that's what I bought. And needless to say, they're not necessarily, in the grand spectrum of lighting equipment, not the best ever, but they got the job done. And I was able to create some pretty awesome photos with that little ego light, right? And so I actually took that little ego light with me to to a photo shoot. Well, it wasn't a photo shoot. It was like a food festival, and I kind of had to set up in the back, and I brought I mean, oh man, I just think about, like, I could have made my life so much easier not dealing with that. But either way, I brought that, and I remember this other photographer going, "What are you doing?" And I was like so harshly judged by my little ego light. And I am like, you know what? I was proud of that little ego light. I did a lot of darn good stuff with that little ego light. So, and that being said, I was actually having this conversation with a friend yesterday. Who is, high-end celebrity photographer, flies all over the world to do photography. And, I said, because he a lot of times borrows my lights, right? Like my Godox lights, which I love my Godox lights. I've had them for years. They're great quality. They're not expensive. I'm a big fan. And so I said, if why don't you shoot, one of these other bigger, fancier brands, more expensive brands? He's like, because these get the job done. It kind of comes back to that same idea. It's not the camera that's taking the pictures. It's not the lights taking the pictures. It's the photographer. So if you are rocking those cowboy lights, like, rock those cowboy lights, be proud of them. I think back to my little ego light, proud of that little guy too, right? Entry level cameras, all of them, like, we all get the same place. You can do so much with equipment that the name brand that's not what makes the photos, right? It's just there to impress somebody. So I am fully in support of the gear that you have. I love it. Adios, Stuart. Good to see you. Here's a good question. Modifying harsh light in post. So my recommendation is, it's hard, right? You really can't affect the quality of the light and alter the quality of the light in terms of the presence of shadows and those elements. Now, you can definitely, like, manipulate contrast. You can definitely open up the shadows. You can, do those sorts of things. But if you don't want those very clear, defined shadows, that's going to be something to work really hard toward then getting it right in camera, which may not be the answer you were looking for. So my apologies. But, if in terms of harsh light, if you are like, well, you were in a situation where you didn't want the light to look that way and you're just trying to make the most of it, then probably opening up your shadows, bringing up that, reducing the contrast, those would be things that I would potentially work with. Also, probably bringing down highlights, right? Like a combination of bringing down your highlights and bringing up your shadows. That'd be the combination I'd go with. Awesome. Okay, here's a great question. I feel like this is something I want to know who else in the comment section share. Who else relates to this question? I don't think you're alone, Simeon. I think this is definitely something a lot of folks can relate to, and is a conversation we have regularly. In the community. So, as a beginner, I want to make sure my work is aligned to brands which reflect the quality of my work as opposed to punching above my weight. Well, always a punch above your weight. That's a recommendation for sure, right? Here's the other thing, like, I feel like there's this fear that we're going to dupe somebody into hiring us and that we're not ready for it. Um, at the end of the day, if somebody hires you because they see something in your work, that means it's valuable to them, and it means it's worth charging for, and it does not mean you are outranked. I will also say I have yet to meet a photographer who has a full appreciation for the quality of their images, right? We are our own worst critics. We see all the flaws. We are our own worst critics, and the self-doubt is so immensely real. So absolutely, I would say take those risks, because I think about my career and the jobs that I've taken, that it was the ones when I was like, I don't feel ready for this. Oh my gosh. Like, I remember one of my first photo shoots for a brand was a Bouillon Cube brand. And I remember I got the job and I was like, I'm not ready for this. Oh my gosh. Like, I mean, I could have puked, right? but there was still like this little small voice inside of me that said, no, you can do it. And two, they'd seen my portfolio, they knew what I could do. And so I did the shoot, right? And guess what? That was one of those defining moments. Just like there's been so many across my journey where I felt like this was just slightly out of reach, but I rose to the occasion, right? Like I leveled up, and it forces that leveling up, that I continue to take jobs that I don't, because you're never going to feel ready, right? Anybody who's waiting to feel ready will never get started, because you never will. And you'll never think that your photos are the bee's knees, and they will never look as good as so-and-so's, right? Like, it was an instant challenge for me just yesterday being back on Instagram, right? I was off Instagram for 5 months. I was back on for one day. I spent just a little too much time scrolling, and then I'm instantly like, oh man, look at that person's work. Oh, look at that person's work. Oh, why am I not doing that? Right? Like, oh, I'll never be at that. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have been on here for 2 minutes. Shut it down, right? So I think keeping some of those things in check as well. But yes, we all absolutely relate to that. So you are more ready than you give yourself credit for. And if somebody is reaching out to you to hire you, you are ready, and it is worth being paid for. So, there's all things to keep in mind. Awesome. All right. Got a couple more minutes here. I'll take two more. So this one, and then I'll take one more. Your first photo shoot for a restaurant for the very first menu. You've never shot food before. Watched some of your videos, which got me subscribed, but I'm still super nervous. Well, I would say welcome to the world of food photography. We're super excited to have you. I would assume you have expertise in photography, maybe some experience in photography elsewhere. I definitely want to, kind of understand a little bit more, but I would say definitely get some practice under your belt. And again, if they've hired you, it's for a very specific reason. So don't overthink it. I would say too, one of the things where I see a lot of people potentially go wrong, and I know I've gone wrong, although, again, there's no wrong or right way, but don't try to overload yourself too much with expectation of, I need to learn A, B, and C things before I go, right? Like, get some good practice, make sure you feel comfortable. I mean, there's, again, get kind of some of those basics so you feel in control of the situation, but, you're not going to feel fully in control, and you're going to be nervous. I mean, I still get nervous before photo shoots. Like, that's totally normal. Just like I get nervous before I get live on YouTube. So, as far as jump into it, what's the worst that's going to happen is also the other thing I always keep in mind. Like, it's just food photography, right? Like, we're not we're not solving the world's problems. We're not curing cancer here. So, if you do the photo shoot and they hate the photos and they're like, forget, like, what's the worst that happen? You refund their money. Okay, right? Like, there are worse things, but I bet that doesn't happen, because I've gone into plenty of photo shoots feeling that way, and then again, did much better than I thought I did, or they love it. And I'm like, well, okay, great. Glad you like it. I will say the very first photo shoot I was ever hired for was for a restaurant. I was shooting with an entry level camera with a kit lens in automatic mode, right? Like that's fine too, right? So you gotta start somewhere. So I would say jump into it, be excited about what you're going to learn, know that there will be things that you will reflect on after the photo shoot and go, learned something new there. I'm going to do that differently next time, right? Because you can't necessarily learn all the things before you get started. You have to learn along the way. Those are the badges of honor that you will collect as you build your business and as you gain experience. So yes, we are super excited for you. Let's all give them some love in the comment section. You can do it. Yes, you can do it. I love it. And let's do one more question. Let's see. Let's see. I think, did we get through most of them? Oh, okay. Here's a good question. I've been trying to grow my photography business. Do you have any tips on how to make a media kit to show businesses? So this is a great question. So as far as a media kit is concerned, so for me personally, I have a media kit, but that is more for my for lack of a better term, influencer side, right? Like the sponsors, people who want to sponsor our YouTube channel, people who want to sponsor Instagram stuff. So courting those kinds of people so they can see the statistics of the channel and the demographics and who we are and what we do and who I am and all that information. That's what I use that media kit for. As far as otherwise for clients, I don't have a media kit for clients. What I will typically do is I do have a proposal that includes, once I've had a discovery call with a potential client, understand what it is that they need, the scope of the project that I can base an estimate on, then I present that estimate as a part of a proposal document that includes examples of images that are in line with, if this is a pizza brand, then when I put together that proposal, I'm going to put pizza photos, you better believe it, inside of that proposal, right? So that they can see examples of that work, that they can get a flavor for who we are, information about the team and the people they'll be working with, and kind of what our services include, all of that information. So if you are looking for templates for a media kit, if it sounds like potentially you have a blog or a YouTube channel, the culture of cookery, that if you wanted a media kit for that, if you go to for sure, Etsy or Creative Market is another place where you can find templates for media kits, even inside of Canva. So even my proposal, I've designed that inside of Canva. So yeah, lots of different solutions in that neighborhood. So very, very good. Let me make sure. I love it. Well, very good. You you have 173 pizza photos. Holy moly! I want to know what kind of pizzas. That's a lot of pizzas. I love it. All right, one more question, and we're going to get more into this in the coming months as we are gearing up towards some exciting things relating to the business of food photography. So there are definitely a lot of questions to ask. Definite recommendation in thinking about it. I mean, there's definitely the things that I want to know as far as like what they're looking for. I think aside from the obvious, right? Like, well, maybe they're not obvious. Things that you would definitely want to know is you would want to know, like, what are we photographing, right? Like, are we photographing recipes? If we're photographing recipes, who's doing the cooking? Where's this going to happen? Who needs to be there? Who needs to be involved in these photos? What's your budget, right? That's a question that everybody gets afraid to ask, but it's super important. Ask it. Like, it's not bad form, at least not here in the US. I'm not sure if there are cultural implications in other places, but definitely, the idea of asking, what is your budget, understanding, because that will definitely dictate. It's like somebody coming to you and saying, well, I want to build a house. Well, you go, okay, great. What size house? Like, how big a house do you want? Marble countertops, or do you want Formica? And do you want, tile, or do you want wood, right? Like all these things that would impact the cost of the price. And so understanding what somebody's budget is. But A real key and something, before every potential client meeting, I will sit and think about the questions that I'm going to ask, in addition to the questions of just the things that I do definitely need to know in terms of putting together an estimate, but also from the standpoint of really understanding, and helping them feel like I understand what they need and to understand the full implications of this photo shoot, are asking open ended questions, right? So, this is something that when I think about my background prior to my life as a salesperson in technology sales, I was actually as a counselor. I have a master's degree in counseling and spent time on college campuses working with college students. And so, one of the things that's super important as a counselor is to ask open ended questions, right? Questions that somebody, when they answer, are not yes or no questions, or one word answers, that they're not a yes or no answer. So, an open ended question, a lot of times being why questions, right? That open up somebody to talk more about their business and what they're hoping to accomplish, because that will really help them to know that you understand what it is that they're looking for, and also helps just to solidify the value that you're bringing as a photographer to the photo shoot. So, thinking about open ended questions that you can ask in that situation. Those are all definitely things that I would recommend in that process. So, awesome. But more on that to come in the coming months and coming weeks as we dig more into some topics on business. We do have a wide variety of different things coming up. The end of this month, we're going to start focusing more on lighting. I realized, lighting is something that it never gets boring, it never gets old, and it's something that I haven't made a video explicit about lighting and lighting demos in quite a while on the channel. So we're going to be getting into some lighting. We've got some food styling stuff coming up in the coming months, as well as digging into some elements of business and more. So I just really want to say a huge thank you to you for hanging out with me here today, celebrating 5 years. The Bite Chat channel is now officially in kindergarten. I'm so proud of us. At least we got through the terrible twos, right? So thank you so much for being here and a part of the channel and making all this possible and hanging out with me and these wonderful questions. Anytime you ask questions, I love it because we get so many great ideas. The Bite Shot team, who I want to give some shout outs to as well, is here on the live monitoring the questions and keeping some ideas so that we make sure to add those to the content calendar as well. But a big thank you to Rachel Richards, who is our director of operations, who's keeping the back end of things all souped up and awesome. And then we also have Aubrey Lemons, who is our community manager for our internal communities over on, well, also handling the social media side of things. But she really takes care of the folks inside our community for our courses. And then we also have Sarah Haas, who is going to be managing our social media accounts and interacting with folks through the Instagrams and the YouTubes and all the fun places. So it takes a village, y'all, and the village continues to expand. We've got so many fun things. We actually have a 5-year plan in place for the Bite Shot. So never fear, the first 5 years down, we've already got a plan for our next 5 years. So stay tuned, many more big things to come. So thanks for hanging out with me. It was good to see y'all here in the chat, and lots of love to you. Lots of love to you. Take care of y'all, and I'll see you soon. Bye.